This is Sarah Jones on the Politicus Pod for Politicus USA's The Daily. What do Harry and Meghan's Netflix documentary, what does it have to do with politics? You might be asking yourself, why is she talking about this? It actually has a lot to do with our politics. Harry and Meghan outed how the media works with the royal family. And it turns out that it's very similar to some of how our media works with favored politicians. And it tells an important story about how media is crafted for an audience, how hate pays, and how social media algorithms further incentivize hate. And an even bigger story about what is behind all of this hate and who benefits. Harry said in the documentary, "I feel as though being part of this family, it's my duty to uncover this exploitation and bribery that happens within our media." Harry is referring to the bargain the royal family has made with the UK media, which is related to some of our own media issues here in the United States, in that it's a form of access journalism, which can end up misleading the public about the subjects it's covering, and even agreeing to not cover one thing if given a scoop on something else. And it can mean agreements about how the coverage is handled, including what is off limits, which isn't to suggest that of course you're going to sometimes agree that there may be topics that somebody won't talk about, but that is not usually done. Certainly in political journalism it's not done, but I'm thinking with the royal family that might be something, they might not want to talk about a health issue. Their standards about what is covered are very different in that sense than what we cover in politics. But the relationship between the media and the institutions that they cover is really important, because this is the lens through which we are all being informed about our world. And when it comes to politics, that means that it's coloring events that impact our lives. And even when the coverage is seemingly trivial, when it stokes hate, it is no longer just celebrity culture or royal culture. It's a weapon that's being used to distract and divide and make a lot of money for a very small group of people. Bot Sentinel's Chris Boozy found that there is a $3.5 million industry behind Meghan Markle social media hate accounts. And this hate is fueled by racism and misogyny, which are so prevalent in our culture, that this story that looks unrelated to our daily lives and even our politics turns out to actually be a global political story. Racism and misogyny are inadvertently, but sometimes deliberately, as we see happening with Meghan Markle, fed to the audience by a mostly white media owners and storytellers who become the gatekeepers of information. And gatekeeping can play a vital role in getting information and in vetting it, as we are seeing play out, for example, in a good way with the Republicans' ongoing attempt to get a certain laptop to become the issue of our times, instead of addressing the issues upon which they ran to get reelected, like, for example, gas prices and inflation. Gatekeeping can be a good thing in responsible hands, and if treated transparently, of course. And this is one reason why newsroom diversity has become such an important topic. But, the individual journalists aren't the reason why this is happening on this global scale, though they too are feeding a machine. Here in the United States, let's take a look at our history. It was clear that our media was at the very least unschooled in racism. And so, during President Obama's 2 terms, we were often told that he was causing division, when it was actually racist reacting negatively to a black man being their president that was causing the issues. Barack Obama was often blamed for white grievances against him, which were clearly based on the stories that these people had been told and the hate they have been fed, instead of the reality of him, for example, trying to help them get affordable health care. In Obama's case, it wasn't necessarily that the people weaponizing racism were racist themselves, although plenty of them have since made it clear that they are. Rather, it's that racism was used as a tool, and it has been throughout history by white, mostly men, but now we see white women. White women can often be the cheerleader for this kind of patriarchy. Maybe they think they're the benefactor if they play along with it. So this has been used throughout history. Racism has, by white men to achieve political ends through division. So if you divide and conquer the little people by telling them these people over here are bad and they're to blame for everything bad in your lives, it's a lot easier to control the masses that way. And that is really the point of racism. The true believers think it's about their culture, quote unquote, but their culture is how they are being fed to support policies that are not meant to help them. And I think we can come back now to the UK, because currently in the UK, these right-wing media outlets blast stories about how Meghan Markle has destroyed the monarchy, as the economy is in a recession for the first time since 2008. And they face inflation and damagingly high energy prices and disruptions in supply chains, as we all do, in part because of the impacts of the war in Ukraine and the pandemic. But some of that was dramatically caused by right-wing policies like the previous far-right Prime Minister Liz Truss, the one whose tenure was compared to a head of lettuce, and she lost to the lettuce, who planned to cut taxes for, quote, financial growth, unquote. I'm sure that sounds familiar to Americans. So drastically that it scared the markets. And so what do we see the papers doing? They focus on Meghan. Let's hate on Meghan. They're not hating on the people who covered for Prince Andrew's payoff of a woman who accused him of raping her when she was a minor, or the conservatives in charge of the government whose trickle-down economics had failed them so badly. And a lot of this hate in the UK is pushed on the Daily Mail, the hate towards Meghan Markle. And we've talked a lot before about bloviating billionaires who own much of our media, and the story here is really no different. The Daily Mail is owned now by Jonathan Harmsworth. What a name, boy, that does seem apt. He is the 4th Viscount Rothmere, and he is the great-great-grandson of the original owner. And yes, the Daily Mail is conservative, but it also has a history of supporting fascism. The original Rothmere was a friend of Mussolini and Hitler, and it's important to note here that editors often have control over content rather than owners, so just because an owner is friends with Hitler doesn't mean necessarily that they're pushing that agenda, although I think, obviously, in hindsight, that would be very troubling. But in this case, there's a story that relates to modern-day right-wing and some far-left talking points about Russia's invasion of Ukraine. How did we get from Meghan Markle to Ukraine? Let's see if this argument sounds familiar. On September 24th, 1930, Rothmere wrote, "We can do nothing to check this movement, the Nazis, and I believe it would be a blunder for for the British people to take up an attitude of hostility towards it. He came about that feeling after being targeted by a Nazi princess and spy who facilitated discussions between people in the UK who believed in appeasement of the Nazis with the Nazis. This part Jewish Austrian princess was adored by Hitler, it was said, until her Jewish ancestry became a problem. And I mention that as a reminder to all who carry water for fascists that rare is the person who is the exception. So if you think you're doing the dirty work of someone who's intimidating you, or who you look up to because you think they have so much power, it won't be long before that power is turned on pretty much everyone else. So that's another lesson from history. So Rathmere was manipulated by this Nazi spy into using his paper to support the appeasement of the Nazis. He wrote an editorial, and more than one, on this. So fair enough, he didn't have the benefit of hindsight like we do now, and plenty of seemingly smart people are still falling for that just give in so the Russians don't have to keep killing people line today, even though today we should know better. The UK's far right and ours aren't exact mirrors, and often our left is their center, but the broader context here is that there's a concerted global effort to push these right-wing populism as a cover for democratic backsliding, and culture wars like the hatred of Meghan Markle play a very important part in that effort. BuzzFeed did a deep dive in 2017 into now indicted former Trump advisor Steve Bannon and how what he calls his, quote, killing machine dredges up the resentments of people around the world, sifts through these grievances for ideas and content, and propels them from the unsavory parts of the internet up to Trump world, collecting advertisers' checks along the way. BuzzFeed pointed out these documents. They had collected a bunch of emails from the Breitbart empire. Chart the Breitbart alt-right universe. They reveal how the website links the Mercer family, the billionaires who fund Breitbart, to underpaid trolls who fill it with provocative content, and to extremists striving to create a white ethno-state. I think we can see how this is all related now. Bannon, it turns out, was not only involved in the racist right-wing populist movement in the United States of the Tea Party under President Obama's tenure, but in 2014 he launched a London branch of Breitbart to capitalize on rural white Britain's anger about immigration, and eventually he became involved in the United Kingdom Independence Party and celebrated Brexit. Steve Bannon is done wrecking the American establishment. Now he wants to destroy Europe's, the New York Times wrote in March of 2018. Bannon is creating a network of far-right groups in Europe to build the infrastructure globally for the global populist movement called, quote, the movement, unquote. That's the name of Steve Bannon's, and this is still going on. This is a current thing now. That's his global right-wing populist organization. It's called the Movement, and Prime Minister Viktor Orban of Hungary has spoken positively of Bannon's The Movement. And Orban, of course, is the man who literally gives instructions to American right-wing conservatives on how to take over a democracy. So I bring this up because it clearly lays bare that there is this audience for racism. There are people willing to peddle it for political power, and there are millionaires and billionaires making a lot of money off of it and using it to get tax breaks and religious policy implemented. And quite pertinently, there are rising global right-wing populists using racism and misogyny as tools to propel themselves to power via a culture war. Of course, now I want to add in, there are many other, there's homophobia, there's anti-Semitism. All of those are now playing a huge part in this movement, and they're not hiding it anymore. When this started, they pretended, and if you read the BuzzFeed article, you can see how carefully they try to distance themselves from Nazis. But now we have Trump having dinner with people who praise the Nazis. So things have taken a turn for the worse in terms of what they are now willing to associate with publicly. So these tools that right-wing populists are using to attack democracy, racism, is a tool of that. This hurts real people. First and foremost, the targets like Meghan, but also all of the regular citizens of color who carry the burden of that racism on their backs, because hate, unlike tax cuts, does trickle down. And racism doesn't only, it first and foremost hurts people of color, but it also hurts people, it hurts our humanity, and it is doing a disservice to white people in the sense that it is distracting them from the real issues and the real problems. The problems in our lives cannot be simplified, and the policies that this kind of hate cover for are policies that are harmful to most of us. So in that sense, we all need to be more aware of racism for our humanity, for the whole Western democracy, for the sake of human dignity and human rights around the world. Racism is one of the biggest tools of power for right-wing populists. It is their gateway to pushing authoritarianism, as we see from Hungary to Italy to Russia and here in the United States. When we see a media organization weaponizing racism, be it social media or news media, we should be aware of these consequences. Hate is the disguise for tyrants. I do not have easy answers for this problem, but awareness can help us see when we are being played. And one thing we can all do is to not participate in this rage machine. While elevated and highly platformed lies and hate have to be fact-checked, we don't need to echo them to fact-check them. You've got to do the fact-check first. Do the fact sandwich. Do the fact, then the lie, and then the fact again. We don't need to be repeating lies and hate or rewarding it with clicks and eyeballs, and that's one of the reasons that I haven't gotten into, although, I've linked all of the sources on the Substack for this podcast, and if you're interested in getting into seeing more about all of this, the sources are linked there. So you can read all about this, the hate and the Nazis and all of that, and the hate accounts against Meghan Markle. I just didn't want to get into, I don't want to get into that toxic sludge. It's important to acknowledge that it's doing real damage, and it does exist. And important people and institutions, like the royal institution, they're playing a part in using that as a weapon to distract people from various other scandals, as is done here in the United States. Although here, Republicans use kind of made-up scandals to distract from bad policies. So it's all about distracting people. we do need to stand up for the targets of hate and speak out when we see racism and all of the other isms that there are, and to do so with a sense of responsibility for all humanity. Because this isn't just about Meghan Markle, it is about so much more than one person. Hate does help someone, but it doesn't help us. The global us who need to stand together to fight the attacks on Western democracy and freedom. This is Sarah Jones with the Politicus Pod for Politicus USA's The Daily. Thank you so much for joining me today, and please consider subscribing and gifting a subscription to our Substack, which we are using to help keep information and analysis free for everyone on Politicus USA, where we focus on how the news impacts the people. And I hope you do get to enjoy the documentary on Netflix, Meghan and Harry. And I look forward to talking with you all soon. Thank you so much.